From the upcoming film True Crimes, please welcome two-time Golden Globe winner, Jim Carrey.
Thank you. I am two-time Golden Globe winner, Jim Carrey.
What if the man who made the world howl with laughter was quietly drowning behind the loudest applause? Imagine flashing cameras, billion-dollar box offices, and a face so elastic it rewired comedy itself. Then cut to a silent room, a single lamp, and Jim Carrey staring at a blank canvas, asking, "Who am I without the mask?" This isn't just celebrity burnout, it's a human alarm. From a kid who used comedy to survive, to the king of 90s blockbusters, to a soul unraveling under fame's fluorescent lights. This is the rise, the fracture, and the dangerous cliff edge of being always on. Tonight, we're pulling back the curtain on the cost of becoming everyone's laugh and losing your own. He didn't begin with Hollywood lights. He began with a bus ride home where silence felt heavier than the night. A shy kid in a working-class family watching his parents do math with bills at the kitchen table. When his father's job vanished, the ground under him did too. Laughter wasn't a hobby, it was a life raft. He learned to twist his face like rubber and voices like radio dials, not to impress classmates, but to keep the room warm when the money ran cold. At 15, he walked onto a stage that smelled like stale beer and hope. The first jokes slipped, the room didn't bite, but he kept going, adjusting rhythm, punching harder, cutting lines that fell like bricks. He bombed, he learned, he came back. Night after night, he carved a new self from embarrassment until strangers leaned forward and waited for the next impossible expression, the next sound that shouldn't come out of a human throat but somehow did. Clubs became laboratories. He studied the crowd like a scientist and himself like a mirror he couldn't stop cleaning. What if the eyebrow moves first? What if the line snaps like a rubber band? He wasn't chasing applause, he was engineering it. Every set was a blueprint for something bigger he couldn't fully name yet. But he could feel it when the laughter hit in a wave and rolled back with his name in it. Auditions followed, rooms with flickering fluorescents, folding chairs, and faces that decided your future in 30 seconds. Sometimes he was too much, sometimes not quite right. He left those rooms like a soldier who knew tomorrow was another mission. The hustle wasn't glamorous. Cheap apartments, scripts smudged with notes, mirrors scarred by practice. But the momentum kept whispering, keep going. Then television cracked the door open. Sketch work gave him a playground where his body could be the punchline and the setup at the same time. Characters that shouldn't exist in real life exploded on screen as if gravity had signed a waiver. People didn't just laugh, they repeated him. Catchphrases escaped living rooms and ran into the streets. Hollywood noticed. Suddenly, the question shifted from who is this guy to can he carry a movie? The gamble arrived, wrapped in a script that needed a human cartoon with a heart. He said yes like a skydiver says yes to wind. And when the film hit, it didn't just make money, it rewired what a broad comedy could be. One lead role led to another, then another, a triple strike in 1 year that most actors never see in a lifetime. On billboards, he looked larger than life, but the private engine still sounded the same: work, refine, repeat. Between premieres and talk shows, he was back to the invisible grind, checking beats, chasing sharper choices, looking for the next gear no one had shifted into yet. Fame didn't invent his ambition, it just turned up the volume. This was the rise, built not on luck, but on 1,000 untelevised nights, on the alchemy of fear into laughter, on a boy who learned that if he could bend his fate, maybe he could bend fate. Before the fall, before the questions, there was this, a relentless climb powered by a need to make the room brighter, even if he had to set himself on fire to do it. At first, it felt like a dream too big to be real. 1 year, 3 films, 3 cultural earthquakes. Ace Ventura, Pet Detective turned him into an overnight sensation, loud, fearless, unapologetically weird. Critics didn't know what to make of it, but audiences couldn't get enough. Then came The Mask, where his body was practically animated, bending laws of physics with expressions alone. And just when the world thought he'd hit his ceiling, he walked into Dumb and Dumber and proved he wasn't a one-hit wonder, he was a comedy juggernaut. In the span of months, Jim Carrey became the face of 1994, the man who could turn a $10 million investment into hundreds of millions. On billboards, he looked larger than life, but the private engine still sounded the same: work, refine, repeat. Between premieres and talk shows, he was back to the invisible grind, checking beats, chasing sharper choices, looking for the next gear no one had shifted into yet. Fame didn't invent his ambition, it just turned up the volume. This was the rise, built not on luck, but on 1,000 untelevised nights, on the alchemy of fear into laughter, on a boy who learned that if he could bend his fate, maybe he could bend fate. Before the fall, before the questions, there was this, a relentless climb powered by a need to make the room brighter, even if he had to set himself on fire to do it. At first, it felt like a dream too big to be real. 1 year, 3 films, 3 cultural earthquakes. Ace Ventura, Pet Detective turned him into an overnight sensation, loud, fearless, unapologetically weird. Critics didn't know what to make of it, but audiences couldn't get enough. Then came The Mask, where his body was practically animated, bending laws of physics with expressions alone. And just when the world thought he'd hit his ceiling, he walked into Dumb and Dumber and proved he wasn't a one-hit wonder, he was a comedy juggernaut. In the span of months, Jim Carrey became the face of 1994, the man who could turn a $10 million investment into hundreds of millions. Hollywood had found its golden ticket. Studios lined up like gamblers in a casino, each one hoping to cash in on his momentum. His paycheck exploded. From a kid who once cleaned floors and lived in a van with his family, he was suddenly commanding sums that made him the highest-paid comedy actor in the world. He was no longer just a star. He was the star, a human phenomenon, a box office guarantee, a cultural symbol of unrestrained humor. But here's the secret about standing that high: the air gets thin. For every laugh he generated, there was pressure. Bigger scripts, higher stakes, the world watching to see if he would fall flat. He wasn't just competing with other actors anymore, he was competing with himself. How do you top a year where every role turns into a pop culture event? The answer is, you can't. But Jim tried anyway. Behind the wide smiles, he was starting to ask different questions. Was this all there was? Was he destined to play the same manic character forever, or could he dig deeper? The turning point came when he started reaching for roles that carried weight. The Cable Guy was his first real departure. Darker, stranger, unsettling. Audiences weren't sure what to make of it, and critics split down the middle. For the first time, the invincible streak wobbled. Yet, in hindsight, it was clear. Jim was searching for more than box office gold. He was searching for truth. Then came The Truman Show, a film that asked, what if your entire life was a performance? The irony wasn't lost on him. He, the man who lived in front of flashing cameras, was now playing a character trapped inside them. It was brilliant, haunting, and it forced audiences to see Jim Carrey as more than just a clown. Here was depth, vulnerability, a cry for authenticity buried beneath layers of comedy. It worked. Awards buzz circled. Suddenly, Jim wasn't just funny, he was profound. And yet, the cracks behind the curtain widened. With fame came isolation. With recognition came relentless scrutiny. Behind closed doors, he battled heartbreak and depression, weighed down by the same spotlight that had lifted him up. He once said that he thought everyone should get rich and famous just to realize it wasn't the answer. Those weren't just words, they were confessions. At his peak, Jim Carrey had everything: money, fame, power, a career most actors would sacrifice decades for. But the higher he climbed, the more unstable the ground beneath him became. The laughter was loud, but the silence afterward was louder. He wasn't just America's clown prince anymore. He was a man standing on the edge of his own creation, wondering if the mask he wore for the world had finally swallowed the person underneath. This was the paradox of his peak. He was unstoppable on screen, but quietly unraveling off it. The slide didn't look like a crash, it looked like a slow fade. After the mid-2000s, the streaks got shorter, the gaps got longer. The machine that once ran on pure momentum started to sputter. Scripts piled up that felt like echoes of past victories, studios chasing the old lightning instead of risking new storms. He tried to keep the flame, but the audience's taste shifted, and so did his heart. What once felt like rocket fuel now felt like static. The spotlight, once warm, turned clinical. Every interview was a diagnosis, every headline a verdict. Off-screen, life grew heavier, grief that didn't fit into punchlines, controversies that multiplied at the speed of social media, the claustrophobia of being watched even when you're trying not to be seen. There's a peculiar cruelty to public love. It can turn into public curiosity and then into public judgment, almost without noticing the person in the middle. He stepped back, not with a press conference or a grand goodbye, but with a quiet absence. Red carpets became rare. The talk show chair went cold. In the silence, he looked for something that didn't ask him to be on. He found paint, big canvases, bolder colors, hands moving like a different kind of performance, one where the applause was a heartbeat returning to normal. The studio became his sanctuary, a warehouse of faces and feelings he couldn't say out loud. Blues that bruised, reds that refused to be polite, strokes that confessed what interviews could only circle. He started talking about identity in a way that sounded strange to some and liberating to others. The ego as a mask, the self as a story you can lay down. He wasn't selling a new brand, he was shedding an old skin. Occasionally, he surfaced, an art show here, a rare role there, and he sounded different, less eager to please, more eager to tell the truth. Fame, he suggested, was a mirror that never stops asking for your reflection, even after you've left the room. He didn't rage against it, he simply refused to keep feeding it. Hollywood doesn't like ambiguity. It prefers comebacks or collapses, not quiet reinventions. But what he chose was neither retreat nor revenge, it was revision. He began curating his life like a gallery, fewer pieces, stronger statements, long pauses where there used to be punchlines. When he acted, he looked for projects with marrow, not just muscle, stories that let him hold both light and shadow in the same palm. The public wrestled with it. Some missed the hurricane of jokes. Others found comfort in the philosopher who once outran cameras and now outran labels. Both were real. Both were him. He had learned the hard lesson of spectacle. If you don't step away from the mask steps over you. There's a moment every performer faces, sometimes at the top, sometimes at the bottom, when the applause doesn't land. In that silence, you find out whether you were chasing noise or chasing meaning. His fall wasn't a failure of talent, it was a refusal to keep paying a price that had grown too high. The cost wasn't just privacy or peace, it was selfhood. So he traded screen time for studio time, scripts for canvases, punchlines for presence. Not because he stopped being funny, but because he started being honest. The man who once bent his face into impossible shapes began shaping a life that didn't require bending at all. This wasn't defeat, it was distance, the healthy kind, a recalibration, not a resignation. And in that space, something unexpected began to return: choice. The chance to say yes only when it meant something. The freedom to disappear, not out of fear, but out of respect for the person who had been performing for everyone else for far too long. From the outside, it looked like he had walked away. No more constant premieres, no more being the guaranteed face of blockbuster comedy. But step closer, and you see it wasn't disappearance, it was transformation. Jim Carrey had shifted from the world's loudest performer to one of its quietest seekers. And in that silence, he found a different kind of voice. When he picked roles again, they weren't just films to fill seats, they were mirrors to hold up. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind had already hinted at it, showing us that even a comedian could bleed on screen. Years later, Kidding put him back in front of cameras as a children's TV host whose private life unraveled. The irony was sharp, but so was the truth. Behind every smile, there's a storm. This wasn't just acting, it was honesty disguised as art. But his true second act unfolded away from the cameras. Painting, philosophy, the language of color and thought. He spoke openly about the masks people wear, about the illusion of chasing ego, about how we confuse identity with performance. Some dismissed it as eccentric. Others heard a man who had touched the extreme of fame and come back to tell us the fire was colder than it looked. He wasn't trying to be a guru, he was just trying to explain what it feels like when applause no longer fills the silence. In interviews, his words were simple but sharp. I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so they can see that it's not the answer. That wasn't bitterness, it was wisdom, because he had lived it. He had stood at the top of the mountain only to discover the peak was hollow. And instead of falling, he chose to climb down, carefully, deliberately, into a valley where life could feel human again. In interviews, his words were simple but sharp. I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so they can see that it's not the answer. That wasn't bitterness, it was wisdom, because he had lived it. He had stood at the top of the mountain only to discover the peak was hollow. And instead of falling, he chose to climb down, carefully, deliberately, into a valley where life could feel human again. Legacy is a tricky word. For some, Jim Carrey will always be the man talking out of his backside in Ace Ventura. For others, he's Truman, staring at the sky painted with limits and daring to walk through them. And for a growing number, he is the artist with a paintbrush, reminding us that the loudest colors often come from the darkest wells. Each era tells a different truth. Together, they tell a story of resilience, reinvention, and survival. And maybe that's the lesson, that laughter can hide pain, that fame can look like freedom but feel like a cage, that the mask you wear long enough can become your skin, unless you're brave enough to peel it off even if it hurts. Jim Carrey's journey isn't just about comedy or movies or even Hollywood. It's about the cost of chasing validation and the courage it takes to stop chasing and start living. So here's the question, was his fall inevitable? Was Hollywood always going to break a man who gave so much of himself to the world? Or did he win by stepping away, by rewriting what success actually means? Jim Carrey showed us that the funniest face can hide the deepest cracks, and that sometimes the bravest act is simply refusing to perform. Now I'll ask you, what do you think? Was his transformation the ending of a career or the beginning of something greater? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if this journey moved you, hit like and subscribe. Because behind every rise and fall, there's a story worth telling, and we're just getting started.